Hello and welcome to Bibliobibuli, where we have a very loud cat today. And also, we're reading A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, Book 1. Where last time...
Eddard had a chit-chat with the king, Robert. It didn't go very well. Because everything he said, Robert disagreed with. We found out that Robert plans on making Jaime Lannister the Warden of the East instead of the surviving Robin Arryn. And Ned says that's not a good idea because Papa Lannister is already the Warden of the West. It's too many Lannisters with too much power. And Robert says, well, too bad. And Ned's kind of like, well, what'd you ask me for then? And then Robert tries to find out what the name of Jon Snow's mom is, and Ned gets really mad about it. And he says, like, don't talk about that. Robert's like, alright, bro.
We did learn the name of, well, allegedly learn the name of Jon Snow's mother. Willow?
Willa.
And Eddard soon shot him down, like Batman hearing the name Martha. Why did you say that name?
We find out that Jorah Mormont has let King Robert know that Daenerys Targaryen is still out there with her brother, and Robert hates all the Targaryens and wants to kill them. And Ned says, no, they're kids, stop, that's a bad idea. And Robert's like,
Channeling his inner Geralt.
And then we also found out that Ned made a promise to his sister before she died.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that is. And that Robert...
We don't know that he made a promise. She just asked him to promise.
Yeah,
it.
That's true.
Promise me, Ned.
Yeah. That's true.
Maybe he was like, fuck no.
Yeah, maybe he didn't. That's true. Maybe he was like, yeah, I can't do that, sorry. And that Robert's, like, still not over it. Again, more iterations of the fact that Robert is still not over that girl. She must have been something else, man. That, Lyanna Stark.
Maybe she wanted, Eddard to tell Robert that he's a piece of shit.
I'm just not that into you.
Tell Robert, I love him like a brother.
Promise me, Ned. Tell him I love him like a brother. Tyrion. The North went on forever. Tyrion Lannister knew the maps as well as anyone, but a fortnight on the wild track that passed for the King's Road up here brought home the lesson that the map was one thing and the land quite another. They'd left Winterfell on the same day as the king, amidst all the commotion of the royal departure, riding out to the sound of men shouting and horses snorting, to the rattle of wagons and the groaning of the Queen's huge wheelhouse, as a light snow flurried about them. The King's Road was just beyond the sprawl of castle and town. There the banners and the wagons and the columns of knights and free riders turned south, taking the tumult with them, while Tyrion turned north with Benjen Stark and his nephew. It had grown colder after that, and far more quiet. West of the road were flint hills, grey and rugged, with tall watchtowers on their stony summits. To the east the land was lower and the ground flattening to a rolling plain that stretched away as far as the eye could see. Stone bridges spanned swift, narrow rivers, while small farms spread in rings round holdfasts walled in by wood and stone. The road was well trafficked, and at night, for their comfort, there were rude inns to be found. 3 days' ride from Winterfell, however, the farmland gave way to dense wood, and the King's Road grew lonely. The flint hills rose higher and wilder with each passing mile, until by the 5th day they'd turned into mountains, cold blue-grey giants with jagged promontories and snow on their shoulders. When the wind blew from the north, long plumes of ice crystals flew from the high peaks like banners. With the mountains a wall to the west, the road veered north by northeast through the wood, a forest of oak and evergreen and black briar that seemed older and darker than any Tyrion had ever seen. The Wolf's Wood, Benjen Stark called it, and indeed their nights came alive with the howls of distant packs, and some not so distant. Jon Snow's albino direwolf pricked up his ears at the nightly howling, but never raised his own voice in reply. There was something very unsettling about that animal, Tyrion thought. There were 8 in the party by then, not counting the wolf. Tyrion travelled with 2 of his own men, as befit a Lannister. Benjen Stark had only his bastard nephew and some fresh mounts for the night's watch, but at the edge of the Wolf's Wood they stayed a night behind the wooden walls of a forest holdfast, and there joined up with another of the Black Brothers, one Yoren. Yoren was stooped and sinister, his features hidden behind a beard as black as his clothing, but he seemed as tough as an old root and hard as stone. With him were a pair of ragged peasant boys from the Fingers. "Rapers," Yoren said with a cold look at his chargers. Tyrion understood. Life on the wall was said to be hard, but no doubt it was preferable to castration. 5 men, 3 boys, a direwolf, 20 horses, and a cage of ravens given over to Benjen Stark by Maester Luwin. No doubt they made a curious fellowship for the King's Road, or any road. Tyrion noticed Jon Snow watching Yoren and his sullen companions with an odd cast to his face that looked uncomfortably like dismay. Yoren had a twisted shoulder and a sour smell. His hair and beard were matted and greasy and full of lice, his clothing old, patched, and seldom washed. His 2 young recruits smelled even worse, and seemed as stupid as they were cruel. No doubt the boy had made the mistake of thinking that the night's watch was made up of men like his uncle. If so, Yoren and his companions were a rude awakening. Tyrion felt sorry for the boy. He'd chosen a hard life. Or perhaps he should say that a hard life had been chosen for him. He'd rather less sympathy for the uncle. Benjen Stark seemed to share his brother's distaste for Lannisters, and he had not been pleased when Tyrion had told him of his intentions. "I warn you, Lannister, you'll find no inns at the wall," he had said, looking down on him. "No doubt you'll find some place to put me," Tyrion had replied. "As you might have noticed, I'm small." One did not say no to the Queen's brother, of course, so they'd settled the matter, but Stark had not been happy. "You will not like the ride, I promise you that," he'd said curtly, and since the moment they set out, he had done all he could to live up to that promise. By the end of the first week, Tyrion's thighs were raw from hard riding, his legs were cramping badly, and he was chilled to the bone. He did not complain. He was damned if he would give Benjen Stark that satisfaction. He took a small revenge in the matter of his riding fur, a tattered bearskin, old and musty-smelling. Stark had offered it to him in an excess of Night's Watch gallantry, no doubt expecting him to graciously decline. Tyrion had accepted with a smile. He had brought his warmest clothing with him when they rode out of Winterfell, and soon discovered that it was nowhere near warm enough. It was cold up here, and growing colder. The nights were well below freezing now, and when the wind blew it was like a knife cutting right through his warmest woolens. By now Stark was no doubt regretting his chivalrous impulse. Perhaps he'd learned a lesson. The Lannisters never declined, graciously or otherwise. The Lannisters took what was offered. Farms and holdfasts grew scarcer and smaller as they passed northward, ever deeper into the darkness of the Wolf's Wood, until finally there were no more roofs to shelter under, and they were thrown back on their own resources. Tyrion was never much use in making a camp or breaking one. Too small, too hobbled, too in the way. So while Stark and Yoren and the other men erected rude shelters, tended the horses, and built a fire, it became his custom to take his fur in a wineskin and go off by himself to read. On the 18th night of their journey, the wine was a rare sweet amber from the Summer Isles that he'd brought all the way from Casterly Rock, and the book a rumination on the history and properties of dragons. With Lord Eddard's permission, Tyrion had borrowed a few rare volumes from the Winterfell library, and packed them for the ride north. He found a comfortable spot just beyond the noise of the camp, beside a swift-running stream with waters clear and cold as ice. A grotesquely ancient oak provided shelter from the biting wind. Tyrion curled up in his fur with his back against the trunk, took a sip of the wine, and began to read about the properties of dragonbone. Dragonbone is black because of its high iron content, the book told him. It is as strong as steel, yet lighter and far more flexible, and of course utterly impervious to fire. Dragonbone bows are most greatly prized by the Dothraki, and small wonder. An archer so armed can outrange any wooden bow. Tyrion had a morbid fascination with dragons. When he'd first come to King's Landing for his sister's wedding to Robert Baratheon, he made it a point to seek out the dragon skulls that hung on the walls of the Targaryen's throne room. King Robert had replaced them with banners and tapestries, but Tyrion had persisted until he found the skulls in the dank cellar where they'd been stored. He'd expected to find them impressive, perhaps even frightening. He had not thought to find them beautiful. Yet they were. As black as onyx, polished smooth so the bones seemed to shimmer in the light of his torch. They liked the fire, he sensed. He thrust the torch into the mouth of one of the larger skulls and made the shadows leap and dance on the wall behind him. The teeth were long, curving knives of black diamond. The flame of the torch was nothing to them. They'd bathed in the heat of greater fires. When he moved away, Tyrion could have sworn that the beast's empty eye sockets had watched him go. There were 19 skulls. The oldest was more than 3,000 years old, the youngest a mere century and a half. The most recent were also the smallest, a matched pair no bigger than the mastiff skulls, and oddly misshapen, all that remained of the last 2 hatchlings born on Dragonstone. They were the last of the Targaryen dragons, perhaps the last dragons anywhere, and they had not lived very long. From there the skulls ranged upwards in size to the 3 great monsters of song and story the dragons Aegon Targaryen and his sisters had unleashed on the 7 kingdoms of old. The singers had given them the names of gods: Balerion, Meraxes, Vhagar. Tyrion had stood between their gaping jaws, wordless and awed. You could have ridden a horse down Vhagar's gullet, although you would not have ridden it out again. Meraxes was even bigger. And the biggest of them, Balerion, the Black Dread, could have swallowed an oryx whole, or even one of those hairy mammoths said to roam the old waste beyond the port of Ibn. Tyrion stood in that dank cellar for a long time, staring at Balerion's huge, empty-eyed skull until his torch burned low, trying to grasp the size of the living animal, to imagine how it must have looked when it spread its great black wings and swept across the skies, breathing fire. His own remote ancestor, King Loren of the Rock, had tried to stand against the fire when he joined with King Mern of the Reach to oppose the Targaryen conquest. That was close on 300 years ago, when the 7 kingdoms were kingdoms, and not mere provinces of a greater realm. Between them the 2 kings had 600 banners flying, 5,000 mounted knights, and 10 times as many free riders and men-at-arms. Aegon Dragonlord perhaps had a fifth of that number, the chronicles had said, and most of those were conscripts from the ranks of the last king he'd slain, their loyalties uncertain. The hosts met on the broad plains of the Reach amidst golden fields of wheat ripe for harvest. When the 2 kings charged, the Targaryen army shivered and shattered and began to run. For a few moments the chroniclers wrote the conquest was at an end, but only for those few moments, before Aegon Targaryen and his sisters joined the battle. It was the only time that Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion were all unleashed at once. The singers called it the Field of Fire. Near 4,000 men had burned that day, among them King Mern of the Reach. King Loren had escaped and lived long enough to surrender, pledge his fealty to the Targaryens, and beget a son, for which Tyrion was duly grateful. "Why do you read so much?" Tyrion looked up at the sound of the voice. Jon Snow was standing a few feet away, regarding him curiously. He closed the book on a finger and said, "Look at me and tell me what you see." The boy looked at him suspiciously. "Is this some kind of trick? I see you, Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion sighed. "You're remarkably polite for a bastard, Snow. What you see is a dwarf. You are what, 12? 14, the boy said. 14, and you are taller than I will ever be. My legs are short and twisted, and I walk with difficulty. I require a special saddle to keep from falling off my horse. A saddle of my own design, you may be interested to know. It was either that or ride a pony. My arms are strong enough, but again, too short. I will never make a swordsman. Had I been born a peasant, they might have left me out to die, or sold me to some slaver's grotesquerie. Alas, I was born a Lannister of Casterly Rock, and the grotesqueries are all the poorer. Things are expected of me. My father was the hand of the king for 20 years. My brother later killed that very same king, as it turns out, but life is full of little ironies. My sister married the new king, and my repulsive nephew will be king after him. I must do my part for the honour of my house, wouldn't you agree? Yet how? Well, my legs may be too small for my body, but my head is too large, although I prefer to think it is just large enough for my mind. I have a realistic grasp of my own strengths and weaknesses. My mind is my weapon. My brother has his sword, King Robert has his war hammer, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books as a sword needs a whetstone if it is to keep its edge. Tyrion tapped the leather cover of the book. That is why I read so much, Jon Snow. The boy absorbed all that in silence. He had the Stark face, if not the name. Long, solemn, guarded, a face that gave away nothing. Whoever his mother had been, she had left little of herself in her son. "What are you reading about?" he asked. "Dragons," Tyrion told him. "What good is that? There are no more dragons," the boy said with the easy certainty of youth. "So they say," Tyrion replied. "Sad, isn't it? When I was your age, I used to dream of having a dragon of my own." "You did?" the boy said suspiciously. Perhaps he thought Tyrion was making fun of him. "Oh, yes. Even a stunted, twisted, ugly little boy can look down over the world when he's seated on a dragon's back." Tyrion pushed the bearskin aside and climbed to his feet. "I used to start fires in the bowels of Casterly Rock and stare at the flames for hours, pretending they were dragon fire. Sometimes I'd imagine my father burning. At other times, my sister." Jon Snow was staring at him, a look equal parts horror and fascination. Tyrion guffawed. "Don't look at me that way, bastard. I know your secret. You've dreamed the same kinds of dreams." "No," Jon Snow said, horrified. "I wouldn't." "No? Never?" Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Well, no doubt the Starks have been terribly good to you. I'm certain Lady Stark treats you as if you were one of her own, and her brother Robb, he's always been kind, and why not? He gets Winterfell, and you get the Wall. And your father, he must have good reasons for packing you off to the Night's Watch." "Stop it," Jon Snow said, his face full of dark anger. "The Night's Watch is a noble calling." Tyrion laughed. "You're too smart to believe that. The Night's Watch is a midden heap for all the misfits of the realm. I've seen you looking at Yoren and his boys. Those are your new brothers, Jon Snow. How do you like them? Sullen peasants, debtors, poachers, rapers, thieves, and bastards like you all wind up on the wall, watching for grumpkins and snarks and all the other monsters your wet nurse warned you about. The good part is there are no grumpkins or snarks, so it's scarcely dangerous work. The bad part is you freeze your balls off, but since you're not allowed to breed anyway, I suppose that doesn't matter." "Stop it!" the boy screamed. He took a step forward, his hands suddenly coiling into fists, closed to tears. Suddenly, absurdly, Tyrion felt guilty. He took a step forward, intending to give the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder or mutter some word of apology. He never saw the wolf, where it was or how it came at him. One moment he was walking towards Snow, and the next he was flat on his back on the hard rocky ground, the book spinning away from him as he fell, and breath going out of him at sudden impact, his mouth full of dirt and blood and rotting leaves. As he tried to get up, his back spasmed painfully. He must have wrenched it in the fall. He ground his teeth in frustration, grabbed a root, and pulled himself back into a sitting position. "Help me," he said to the boy, reaching up a hand. And suddenly the wolf was between them. He did not growl. That damned thing never made a sound. He only looked at him with those bright red eyes and showed him his teeth, and that was more than enough. Tyrion sagged back to the ground with a grunt. "Don't help me, then. I'll just sit here until you leave." Jon Snow stroked Ghost's thick white fur, smiling now. "Ask me nicely." Tyrion Lannister felt anger coiling inside him and crushed it out with a will. It was not for the first time in his life he'd been humiliated, and it would not be the last. Perhaps he even deserved this. "I would be very grateful for your kind assistance, Jon," he said mildly. "Down, Ghost," the boy said. The direwolf sat on his haunches. Those red eyes never left Tyrion. Jon came back around him, slid his hands under his arms, and lifted him easily to his feet. Then he picked up the book and handed it back. "Why did he attack me?" Tyrion asked with a sidelong glance at the direwolf. He wiped blood and dirt from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Maybe he thought you were a grumpkin." Tyrion glanced at him sharply. Then he laughed. a raw snort of amusement that came bursting out through his nose entirely without his permission. "Oh, gods," he said, choking on his laughter and shaking his head. "I suppose I do rather look like a grumpkin. What does he do to Snarks?" "You don't want to know." John picked up the wineskin and handed it to Tyrion. Tyrion pulled out the stopper, tilted his head, and squeezed a long stream into his mouth. The wine was cool fire as it trickled down his throat and warmed his belly. He handed the skin to Jon Snow. "Want some?" The boy took the skin and tried a cautious swallow. "It's true, isn't it?" he said when he was done. "What you said about the Night's Watch?" Tyrion nodded. Jon Snow set his mouth in a grim line. "If that's what it is, that's what it is." Tyrion grinned at him. "That's good, bastard. Most men would rather deny a hard truth than face it." "Most men," the boy said. "But not you." "No," Tyrion admitted. "Not me. I seldom even dream of dragons any more. There are no dragons." He scooped up the fallen bearskin. "Come, we'd better return to camp before your uncle calls the banners." The walk was short, but the ground was rough underfoot, and his legs were cramping badly by the time they got back. Jon Snow offered a hand to help him over a thick tangle of roots, but Tyrion shook him off. He would like to make his own way, as he had all his life. Still, the camp was a welcome sight. The shelters had been thrown up against the tumble-down wall of a long-abandoned holdfast, a shield against the wind. The horses had been fed, and a fire had been laid. Yoren sat on a stone, skinning a squirrel. The savoury smell of a stew filled Tyrion's nostrils. He dragged himself over to where his man Morrick was tending the stew-pot. Wordlessly, Morrick handed him the ladle. Tyrion tasted and handed it back. "More pepper," he said. Benjen Stark emerged from the shelter he shared with his nephew. "There you are! John, damn it, don't go off like that by yourself. I thought the others had got you." "It was the Grumpkins," Tyrion told him, laughing. Jon Snow smiled. Shark shot a baffled look at Yoren. The old man grunted, shrugged, and went back to his bloody work. The squirrel gave some body to the stew, and they ate it with black bread and hard cheese that night round the fire. Tyrion shared around his skin of wine until even Yoren grew mellow. One by one the company drifted off to their shelters and to sleep, all but Jon Snow, who had drawn the night's first watch. Tyrion was the last to retire, as always. As he stepped into the shelter his men built for him, he paused and looked back at Jon Snow. The boy stood near the fire, his face still and hard, looking deep into the flames. Tyrion Lannister smiled sadly and went to bed.
Tyrion, the dragon lover.
I identify with that. Hardcore.
Yeah, 100%.
Like,
I think anyone on this channel can identify with Tyrion.
how?
Loving books, loving dragons.
And good wine.
And good wine.
And good food.
And good food.
Tyrion knows...
Well, he likes everything burnt. I don't know about good food.
Okay, maybe not good food. Good wine, good books, dragons.
And I would be very skeptical if Tyrion came up to me and told me something needed more pepper. Like, you eat burnt bacon.
Black
bacon.
Not even
I
just
love
burnt
crispy bacon, but black, yeah. And black toast, like. Yeah,
well, the bread is black. The bread was just
Oh.
black. It's, I'm assuming,
one of those
Westerosi pumpernickel.
charcoal buns or something, maybe.
Or like Russian black bread.
Maybe. I've never had that.
It's good.
Either way,
it's got a
if he came
pumpernickel
up to
kind of
me
taste.
and I knew his eating habits and he told me something needs more pepper, and I'd be like, all right, doesn't need any more pepper. Got it.
No more S&P.
Nope.
I just cannot imagine that, like, putting myself into Tyrion's shoes, going to King's Landing for the first time, and you go to walk into, like, what is it, the throne room? What does he call it?
Yeah.
The reception hall, the throne room. And you're expecting to see all the skulls of the Targaryen dragons, and all you see are Baratheon banners. And you're like, yo, where's the dragon skulls? And they're like, they're in the basement. I'd be so offended. I'd be like, they're in the basement? Why are they in the basement? These are...
So are you going to do anything with them, or do you mind if I take one, or...
To quote a famous archaeologist, they belong in a museum.
Yes, where everyone can see.
Yes.
I do I know we contrast the show a lot, but to contrast, I'm pretty sure in the show, if I recall, the bones are white.
Yeah, they
like
are.
normal bones.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, they look like
I forgot
normal
that they're supposed to be black. I know I
Which is
remember they're
awesome.
supposed to be like iron and stuff like that, but
Which is way cooler. Just saying.
mm-hmm. And I think what's really cool is they talk about the dragons having like iron bones and stuff. There's those snails that live in the Arctic that actually create like iron armor around them. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that's cool. It's like, well, that's actually
kind of
anatomically, it could really happen. So dragons may have existed. Either way, another thing I think they got wrong in the show with the skull is, I would have to look up another picture of it, but I'm pretty sure when Cersei stands next to Balerion's skull, she's like up to maybe his eye socket or something. And then he says that Balerion was so big he could swallow an orc's whole. Which an orc's...
Or even a woolly mammoth. Maybe.
Maybe. Either way, yeah, an oryx was like the ancestor of the modern day cow, and it was bigger than the cow, so it was like a buffalo size. So
like a
huge.
Massive, huge
So I don't
buffalo.
think they got the scale right there either. In the show.
Because I think that's the picture, right?
Yeah.
So that's the picture.
Yeah,
that's definitely not big enough.
That's a huge skull, but yeah, that's definitely not big enough.
No, not even close. Not even
So
close.
it's really insane to think how large this creature was.
Right, like, they mentioned Meraxes and Vhagar, and you could ride a horse into Vhagar's down his throat.
Yeah.
That's a huge dragon,
And
man.
that was the smallest of the three that he described, wasn't it?
I think Vhagar was a little bit bigger. I think Meraxes was a little... No.
That was the smallest of the three. Meraxes was larger.
Hang on. Because Meraxes was Rhaenys' dragon, and Vhagar was... what's the other sister's name?
I don't know. I can't remember.
That's gonna actually bug me that I can't remember what the other sister.
That's a fire and blood thing.
I
don't think
know.
we ever learn it in these books. I know we learn a little bit about.
Meraxes was bigger.
Dragons.
Yep, you were right.
Yeah.
Meraxes was bigger.
Yeah. So the smallest of the three, you could ride a horse down its throat.
It's a big dragon.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You can kind of see.
I just kind of wanted to point that out because anyone who's seen the show, think bigger. That's the little one she's standing next to. That's the baby.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it would have to be bigger than the skull Cersei was standing next to in order to ride a horse down its throat.
Yeah.
So.
Because you look at its mouth, you look at the skull that Cersei stands next to, you can kind of imagine what that skull looks like when it opens its mouth, right? Like what the dragon's mouth would look like. You might, she might be able to walk inside of its mouth, but there's no way she could ride a horse, be mounted on a horse, fit in the mouth, and also fit in the throat. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not physically possible. The size is wrong.
And also, speaking about Cersei, it doesn't sound like Tyrion likes Cersei too much. Or his father. He would go down to the crypts and Casterly Rock.
Pretend he was burning them
with fires and...
Pretend he was burning them with dragons.
I know.
And Jon Snow...
Foreshadowing? Question mark?
I just love this little bit of history with the dragons that Tyrion kind of takes you through. You get a scope for what dragons used to be and how massive and terrifying they were and how Aegon was able to conquer Westeros. You just get the idea just based off that. They had these huge ass dragons. That's all they needed. And you go through and then he talks about...
And it would be the perfect vehicle for someone like Tyrion to have the power that he's never had.
Right. And then you get the description of the last dragons ever hatched on Dragonsnow. And the skulls are the size of dog skulls, and they're misshapen and not right, and they didn't live long. So it's just it kind of makes you think what happened between Aegon and Balerion the Black Dread to the those
Well,
poor
I
little
guess if we ever
deformed baby dragons.
if we ever get around to reading Fire and Blood, and if the sequel to that ever comes out, we will know.
Yeah.
100%.
I don't know, it just makes me sad. Little tiny deformed dragons.
Well, this will cheer you up. Ghost is a good boy.
Yeah, and yeah, I was getting there. Just to kind of talk about dragons for a minute. They're my favorite, okay?
I know. Just trying to keep you on track.
My fish is named
We're talking
Valerian.
about stuff that we don't even learn in these books.
I know, I'm sorry. So yeah, juxtaposed with all of this very interesting dragon lore, we also get a very interesting conversation with Jon Snow.
Yes.
And Ghost, yes, Ghost being a good boy. He is a good boy.
He is.
He's a very smart boy.
He is.
And still
He
doesn't make a sound. He's a quiet bee.
He
unlike
walks
you.
softly and carries a big tooth. Big bite.
Like Jon
And
Snow, how did Ghost know that Jon Snow was feeling a certain kind of way? I mean, did he just react just based on how upset Jon Snow was, and he just like...
Well, they say dogs can read our emotions very well, so...
But where was Ghost at the time?
Obviously close by.
Close enough?
Close enough.
I don't know. I feel like...
You don't know, he's silent. He's ghost-like.
Yeah. And he makes Tyrion uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Makes Tyrion very uncomfortable. He's like, I don't know what it is about
Well, if
that
I
one.
would... Well, maybe the, attacking him could have something to do with it.
But he felt that way before that. He says in his little description, like, riding along with these people. I don't know.
Well,
that
yeah,
direwolf was,
I'd probably feel the same if I ever met a dog that never made a sound. Even when he moves,
Yeah, he's super quiet. It's, yeah.
And poor John, seeing his brothers in arms that he has to go live with.
Yeah.
Who was it?
Two rapists.
Yeah.
And
One's name was like Piss or something like
I
that.
don't think they named them. I don't think they had a name yet.
The one was named Urine.
No. The guy
I know
urine.
it's urine.
Urine.
But I call him Urine.
With a lice in his beard.
Yes.
Like, ew, lice in your beard. Gross, man. Can you imagine?
Oh. I can cut that shit off.
But they're so cold.
I don't care.
I don't know. But I think you also get the sense that Tyrion is a very sympathetic person. He really feels bad for Jon Snow, and I don't think him saying all that stuff to Jon Snow was to be mean to him. I think he was saying it to, like, give him a reality check. Like, kid, do you really know what has happened to you? Do you have any idea what you're walking into? What your dad is letting you about to go do?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. Tyrion is just very blunt about it.
Yeah.
He said it when we first met him.
Yeah.
He's a grotesque, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So he's allowed to be blunt.
Yeah, he doesn't have to conform to everybody's rules.
Mm-hmm.
Urine and the two rapists.
Yes.
These are who you're gonna live with, John.
Have fun.
Poor kid. At least he has Ghost. I also I think I appreciate these more than I did the first read through, because I just don't think I took it in as much.
Well, yeah, the first read through, you're just paying attention mainly to the story, and you're
What's
like,
gonna happen?
I just want to get to the next chapter. I want to find out what happens next.
You get Tyrion's description of the further north they go, the wilder it gets, the colder it gets.
Yes.
And the constant descriptions of, like, literally it's just like, it's cold. Damn, it's cold! Jesus, it's so cold! It's so cold!
It's like knives cutting through him.
Yeah. It's like all these descriptions.
And then you think of the White Walker's weapons.
Yeah, they're like big...
It's just...
Yeah. They have these big blades.
Yeah. Ice so thin, thinner than a razor. It's almost just a blade of pure cold
Right.
that cuts through you.
Lots of imagery.
Mm.
Lots of just cold.
Yeah.
Cold. Oh, did we mention it's cold? Did we mention it's really, 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 really cold?
And they're not even there yet.
And they're not even there yet. And it's cold!
I would not survive.
You would have a very hard time.
I would not. No, I wouldn't do it.
What if you had a choice? What if somebody was like, you have to join the Night's Watch or you will be castrated?
I would say, bet I'll join the Night's Watch. As soon as I get up there, I'm running away, because the worst thing that's going to happen is they cut off my head.
Well, Lord Stark probably cuts off your head.
Yeah.
Or, well, maybe Robb. Does Robb do the King's Justice now that Ned's leaving?
Yeah, he's got to. He's in charge of Winterfell. So he has to uphold the Winterfell
All the
honor.
rules.
I mean, unless Catelyn wanted to do it, and I don't think that she's down for that.
I don't know. She's pretty down to do whatever to Jon Snow. I think she has a ruthless streak in her a little bit. That's,
So I'm talking, yeah, Jon Snow, I think she would be, like, cool with. But I'm saying, like, if it was me or just some random person.
I know, I was just kidding. So please like us, comment, subscribe. We hope that you like us.
Like us, comment us,
Subscribe us. And join us next time for the next Catelyn chapter.